This episode of Shaun of the South is brought to you by Case Knives, a tradition of my family dating back to my granddaddy, who once said the best cure for idle hands was to build something, so keep your hands sharp with a Case knife. And by Folklore Brewing and Meadery, quite literally, the best brew in Alabama. Visit folklorebrewingandmeadery.com.
Well, you are listening to Shaun of the South, and I'm your host tonight, Sean Dietrich. We are coming to you live via the podcast airwaves and radio waves all over this fine nation. We've got a great show lined up ahead of you here tonight, a great show. This lovely group of identical twins you see sitting behind me here is Katie Lou and Penny Lee Clark from the Purple Holes, everybody, the Purple Holes.
Of time, I have a future in heaven for sure. There in those mansions of mine, and it's because of that wonderful day when at the cross I believe riches eternal and blessings supernal from His precious hand I received. Heaven came down and glory filled my soul. My Savior made me whole. My sins were washed away, and my night was turned to day. Heaven came down and glory filled my soul. All my sins were washed away, and my night was turned to day.
This portion of our program is brought to you by visitnorthalabama.org, the Mountain Lakes Tourist Association. Visit the 16 North Alabama counties and make this state what it is. The North Alabama Hallelujah Trail, for instance, features 32 churches that are at least 100 years old, standing on their original sites, still holding services, and are accessible to the public. Now, these are the portrait of North Alabama's history and tell the remarkable story of early Alabamans from the early days. You can wind through 16 counties, and the churches that you will see were the churches that were selected during an intensive 2-year scientific research process, which included testing the walls with specialized equipment to detect whether or not actual shouting had taken place inside. See the white painted timber frame church that is St. John's Episcopal Church in Tuscumbia, built in 1855, or visit Mount Pleasant Methodist Church and see aged white wood and square nail and wood peg construction. Or visit my particular favorite, Pine Torch Church, a tiny little primitive log cabin in Bankhead National Forest built from the poplar trees in 1850. Pine Torch Church still holds church service every Sunday at 10 a.m. Be there or be square. So visit the Trail of Churches and sit in a pew or two and remember your fundamentalist pioneers who taught you how to sing good songs, believe in things, and how to feel very guilty for dancing at wedding receptions. Whatever you do, you can do it better in North Alabama. So visit northalabama.org or hashtag #VisitNorthAL. Now let's have another tune here from Katie Lou and Penny Lee Clark. The Purple Holes, everybody, the Purple Holes. Well, we're going to read you a little bit of our mail sent in to us from listeners all over this fine nation who had nothing better to do than put pen to paper or finger to keyboard or send us their derelict homing pigeons. And tell us a little bit about what they're doing and what they're up to and what's going on in their lives. Or sending us a letter asking us to cease and desist under threat of legal consequence. Our first letter comes from Josh in Siler City, North Carolina. Hi, Sean. I just wanted to say that you are kind of a favorite of my week. I listen to you when I'm painting houses. I dangle from ladders and scaffolding several stories in the air, and I listen to your tales, and your show helps make the workday go by a little faster. My only request is try not to make the show too good, or else I might get so into it that I fall from my ladder and break my neck. Your friend, Josh. Well, Josh, I can safely say you are in no danger because we are not about to make this show that good. Billy from Hoover, Alabama. Hi, Sean. My name is Billy with an I-E, but I'm a woman named after my mother, who was also Billy with an I-E, and my sister is Bobby with an I-E. Last week, my husband and I were at a conference in New York City, and my husband and I walked into a cafe while we were on a lunch break from the conference because the cafe advertised that they served biscuits and gravy. And we were very excited about this because we had been doing without home cooking for a full week in New York City. So we walked in, and the girl behind the counter said she could hardly understand our accents, which made us feel a little embarrassed. But then we ordered biscuits and gravy, and she placed on our plate 2 brown-looking hockey pucks made of 7 grains with added fiber. She called them biscuits, and then she topped them with what looked like purified motor oil. Then they sprinkled sesame seeds on top, and they put wasabi sauce next to it. Sean, we have never felt more like aliens in our entire lives than we did in New York City. We could not wait to get home to Alabama. Well, dear Billy, I leave you with something my father used to say. There is no greater form of birth control than a New York City accent. Glenda from Eugene, Oregon. My car died last week, and I thought it was going to be a bad week because I thought I was going to be stranded and have to find transportation. But it worked out because my neighbor had an extra car sitting in his backyard that his son had left when he came home from college to visit. And then, as it turned out, my car could not be fixed without paying a huge chunk of money, which I was not willing to spend. The car is not worth it. And also, it turned out that my neighbor wanted to sell that car that I'd been borrowing, his son's car, and he wanted to sell it for way less than it would have cost me to fix my car. Are you with me? So in the end, Sean, it all worked out smoothly, and I never had to go without a car. It was a small-scale miracle, and those are the miracles that I'm trying real hard to pay attention to at this stage in my life. Thanks for the show. Reba from Nebraska City, Nebraska. Nebraska City, Nebraska. Last night I was watching a movie, and it was late at night, a scary movie, when I heard this sound on my back porch, and because the movie had me worked up, I was totally freaked out because I was pretty wrapped up in an intense scene. When I got up, I found that it was my neighbor's son, and he had accidentally come to my house instead of his house because it was dark, and our 2 houses looked very similar. So I was neighborly, and I invited him in, and we hit it off. We watched the rest of the movie together, and while we were waiting for his parents to come pick him up, there was a knock at the door during a very intense scene, and it was his mother, and we both about jumped out of our skin. But it was a fun night, and since then, me and the neighbor kid have become quite close. And the cool part about all this is I don't have a son. My son died 15 years ago. I take this as a gift to an old lady from above. Anyway, keep up the good work. Vicky from Lake City, Florida. Sean, my dad turned 70 as I write this, and I wanted to wish him a happy birthday. I don't know if he'll ever hear your show because he doesn't listen to many podcasts, but I'm going to try to get him to put his hearing aids in and listen to it. He has fancy hearing aids with Bluetooth capability, so he can listen to things like Netflix and movies and such. So maybe we can get him to listen to your podcast. Anyway, his name is Mark. He's turning 70 years old. Well, dear Mark, from everybody here tonight, a bunch of strangers you don't know, turn up them hearing aids and happy birthday. Robert from Bardstown, Kentucky. Bardstown, Kentucky. I have no idea where that is. Dear Sean, I just wanted to tell my mother over the airwaves, thank you for getting me listening to this show. because she lives in Pennsylvania where I was raised, and I live in Kentucky with my in-laws and my wife's family. And sometimes I get pretty lonely. But this show sort of keeps us connected now. So send my message out to Mama. That's my letter. Thanks a lot. Well, dear Robert and dear Robert's Mama, I hope you all connect to this show. Cynthia from Martinsburg, West Virginia. Sean, I inherited some money from my mother, and it wasn't much, but I have been going back and forth to figure out what I was going to do with that money. I'm glad to say I finally figured it out. I know what I will do now. I'm going to build myself a backyard pottery studio located behind my house because I've always wanted to do pottery, and I've never had the means to do it. Anyway, I'm writing you because I want to know if maybe I can send you some pottery once it's made. I hope you let me. It would be my privilege. Your friend, Cynthia. Well, dear Cynthia, please see the address that has been attached in my responded message. I think it would be wonderful to receive some handmade custom pottery in the form of anything, really. A coffee mug, a plate. And if you really find that you're not any good at what you're doing, send me a paperweight. And I promise I'll use it. Ellen from Tarpon Springs, Florida. Tarpon Springs, Florida. I gave up coffee this week with my mom, who is almost 90 years old. And we're doing it together because the doctor said that coffee is taxing her adrenal glands and caffeine is making her constantly dehydrated. So it sounded like a good idea. I decided to do it with her for solidarity's sake. Well, after one day of misery, I got a call from my mom. She lives in an assisted living facility, and she said that there was no way in God's earth that she was going to keep going without coffee. She changed her mind on me, and she relapsed after only 16 hours. Me, on the other hand, I've been without coffee for several weeks now, and I wish that I could tell you that I feel great, but I will tell you the truth. It is hell on earth. The experts say it gets better after 6 weeks. I guess I'm going to keep trying. Until then, thanks for the shows. I hope they can keep me smiling throughout this pain. Well, dear Ellen, keep up the good work and fight the good fight. From everybody here tonight. Sonia in Lynchburg, Virginia. There's this guy in my neighborhood who always cuts the lawns of older people in our neighborhood. He does this just because. He never accepts any cash, and he never accepts any credit. And I've always seen him out there, but always wondered about what he's doing, although I've never asked. Until this past week, I got curious. And the reason for that is because I got pretty sick, and so did my husband. We were down for the count with a cold. And I looked out there in our front yard, and I saw my neighbor in our sidewalk shoveling snow from the sidewalk. And I felt so humbled. See, I've never realized what a service he's actually been providing for the people in our neighborhood. It's not so much about the work he does. It's about the way it makes you feel to know that somebody you hardly even know cares enough to help you out when you need it the most. My husband and I are feeling a lot better now, thank you very much, and I've decided to start helping people just like my neighbor does. Any little bit, I think, will matter. Even if it's raking their yard or offering to get their mail or whatever. I thought I'd share that for your listeners. Maybe it's time that we all do a little bit of something just to be nice to other people. Well, dear Sonia, thank you for that. I can wholeheartedly agree. With that. We all wish you luck in your endeavor of human kindness upon this earth, but more importantly, we wish you grace and mercy, because living in a place where it snows makes all of us here in this part of the world feel very, very sorry for your immortal soul. And that's letters from our listeners. Letters from our listeners. Now let's have another tune here from Katie Lou and Penny Lee Clark. The Purple Holes, everybody. The Purple Holes.
Welcome to West Texas. There's music music in the air. Dust clouds, a tornado or two, no telling what's up there. Well, the wind outside is howling, coyotes crying fear. Welcome to West Texas, you're gonna like it here. You wake up in a dust storm, at noon it starts to rain. The front blows through at 2:15, at 3 it's sunny again. The wind picks up a little, you see a house go flying by. Be sure to watch your spit or it'll hit you in the eye. Welcome to West Texas, there's music in the air. Dust clouds, a tornado or two, no telling what's up there. Well, the wind outside is howling, coyotes crying fear. Welcome to West Texas, you're gonna like it here. Here comes a big blue northern, it's looking cold and dense. In the morning, grab an ice pick, chip the livestock off the fence. If you don't like the weather, we'll just wait an hour or two. Yesterday's high was 95, this morning is 22. Welcome to West Texas, there's music in the air. Dust clouds, a tornado or two, no telling what's up there. Well, the wind outside is howling, coyotes crying fear. Welcome to West Texas, you're gonna like it here. Be sure to nail those windows shut, stuff paper in the cracks. Cowboys, pull your kerchiefs up, may the wind be at your back. But don't worry about breathing dust in, scientific research shows West Texas dust is so big that it won't fit in your nose. Oh, welcome to West Texas, there's music in the air. Dust clouds, a UFO, no telling what's up there. Well, the wind outside is howling, coyotes crying fear. Welcome to West Texas, you're gonna like it here. Welcome to West Texas, you're gonna like it here.
Nighttime in the country is an experience that you have to have one time in your life before you die. It never fails. Whenever I take the unbaptized into the country and show them the night sky above them, they all say the same things. Man, I didn't know there were that many stars up there. It is an experience. You're not ready for it when you see that many stars at once, but that's nighttime in the country. In the country, you can see everything. You look up into the sky, and it looks like indelible ink. And there are rock salt stars scattered above you by the thousands, by the millions, by the cajillions. It looks like God sneezed all over the fabric of heaven. You look at that and it moves you. A lot of people in the U.S. can't see the stars. See, half the world lives in an urbanized society around the globe. And the main problem with an urbanized society is sky glow, or light pollution, as the modern timers call it. Light pollution is simply that. The light never disappears. The ambient glow glows for miles into the sky and renders the stars themselves absolutely invisible. During my granddaddy's era, a kid could walk outside on the front lawn, he could look up into the sky, and he could see 2,500 stars with the naked eye. Today, a kid walks out into his yard. He looks up. He sees 3 stars and 4 747s flying overhead. Sky glow has become such a problem that it has changed the migratory patterns of birds. Birds fly into skyscrapers that are lit, and lit windows and buildings all over the city. Trees forget how to bloom, and their schedule of blossoming is disrupted. And so some trees never do shed their leaves. Other trees shed their leaves early. It's disrupted a lot of the national parks. People go to national parks and they've claimed that they can't see stars because of the ambient light. A good example of this, though, is in L.A. in 1994. There was an earthquake in L.A. L.A. with its sky glow that can be seen 200 miles above the city, 200 miles in every direction from outer space. It looks like Rudolph's nose. But in 94, there was an earthquake, and it knocked out all the power temporarily. And within minutes, emergency hotlines were receiving calls from people who said they had seen a strange, mysterious, cloudy object floating in the night sky that looked downright alien. It was the Milky Way. They'd never seen the Milky Way before. But nighttime in the country, you'll see it. It was nighttime in the country when the little boy with the red hair walked out onto the porch. The screen door slapped behind him. His red hair was a mess, like a cow just licked him. Out on that porch was an old man sitting on a porch swing. And he was whittling a stick, and beside him was a little table with a Philco transistor radio with a faux wood grain and a tweed speaker, and it was broadcasting the Cardinals-Braves game. The score was 10-0. The Braves were getting shelled. Because back in those days, pre-World Series championships, the Braves were not an exceptional baseball team. They were the team that would break America's heart over and over again. If you were unlucky enough to be a Braves fan, you knew that there was no difference between an Atlanta Braves team player and Michael Jackson. They both wore one glove and didn't do nothing with it. The little boy was wearing Superman pajamas. Superman pajamas his mama bought from the Sears store. They had 2 little Velcro buttons on his shoulder blades where a red cape accessory was supposed to be when he decided he wanted to fly around to the house and test the limits of the staircase banister. And because this was a different era, that child had a big red and yellow S imprinted on his butt. Because back then, mamas thought stuff like that was cute. The kid walked across the porch, and the old man looked at him. The old man was whittling a block of basswood with a knife. He said, "What are you doing up so late?" The little boy palmed his sleepy eyes. He said, "I couldn't sleep. I had a bad dream." Granddaddy smiled at him, and he patted his porch swing. He said, "Why don't you step into my office and we'll talk about it?" The little boy climbed up onto the porch swing and he sat down. There was a crescendo in the rise of the crowd humming through that tweed speaker on the radio. One of the Cardinals hit a homer. It was now 12-0. No greater pain hath any man than to watch the Braves lose. Granddaddy turned down the radio ever so slightly. And in the distance were the sound of crickets singing their aria chorus. And the beautiful night sky above them was putting on quite a show. The little boy looked at what his granddaddy was carving. It was a block of basswood that was crudely shaped. His granddaddy was one of a generation of men who always employed their pocket knife for passing the time. They always carried a jackknife in their right pocket, and they always unclicked it at the times of boredom in their life, and they would use it to slice shavings off of pieces of wood found in the backyard, a pine stick or a hickory stick. And what old men used to do is they would sharpen these sticks into a fine point, and then they'd inspect that point, and then they'd throw it over the side of the porch, and they'd pick up another stick, and they'd do it again. And this is how roughly 50% of the men of my childhood passed 60 years of their life gently carving them sticks and pieces of wood. But this old man, he wasn't carving a stick to a point. He was carving a fine block of bass wood that he'd bought from the hardware store. And this crude shape in his hand, it looked like it was supposed to represent a mammal of some kind. The little boy said, "What are you carving, Granddaddy?" Granddaddy held it up and he said, "I'm carving a hound dog, can't you tell?" The boy thought it looked more like a deranged ferret, truth be told. Granddaddy seemed to sense his little grandson's thoughts, and he tousled his hair. He said, "Oh, listen, every carving takes lots of time to make. You have to go through many different stages. You have to rough out the shape, then you got to refine that shape before you can get to the other shapes which are inside the shape. See this right here? This is his snout. Before I can work on his snout, I have to rough this shape out here." And the kid looked at his granddaddy's knife, which had been sharpened so many times throughout the hundreds of years. A butter yellow case knife, double-bladed, with blades that looked carbonized from so many passes over the whetstone. The contour of the blade was altered through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of swipes against that piece of stone to sharpen it and hone it. That the contour was no longer convex, but it was concave. And the boy watched his granddaddy's artistic hands move against that wood, and the granddaddy said, "This right here is supposed to be Shelby, this dog." And the boy said, "Who's Shelby?" Granddaddy looked at his carving again. He said, "You mean I never told you about my hound dog, Shelby?" The kid said, "No." He said, "Oh, Shelby? She was 1 in a million. 1 in a billion. Yeah, I found her in the east field one night, late one night, when I heard this yelping from my upstairs bedroom. I looked out the window and I heard this agonizing cry of an animal. And I threw on my bathrobe and I went downstairs and I got the little kerosene lantern, I lit it, and I walked out into the east field and I followed that yelping, and it just got louder and more agonizing the closer I got to it. And I saw out there in that east field a little shape caught in the barbed wire. I held my lantern over that dog, and its coat was copper red. And I could see it was sliced open from that barbed wire, and she was just a-crying. She wasn't a very old dog. She was kind of young, but she had long, floppy ears and big old jowls and droopy eyes that looked sadder than a politician's. She just looked at me and she howled as if to say, "Help me, help me." So I hung my lantern on a post, and I bent down there and I used my hands to unweave that barbed wire from her skin where it was digging into her, and I could see that it was worse than I thought it was. It was bad. Oh yes, it was bad. But she trusted me. She never once growled at me, even though most dogs in pain will do something like that. And then I lifted her up in my arms. I held her with both arms, and I ran to the east field, and I said, "Mama, Mama, help me, Mama." The old man looked at his grandson, who was now leaned against his shoulder, wrapped in the skill of a good storyteller. A pleasure which I fear none of you here in this theater tonight will ever experience because you stuck with me. The old man said, "Yeah, I put her down on the kitchen floorboards and it was a mess. There was mud and red everywhere. It was a mess." And my mama, she came running down from the upstairs bedroom. She saw that dog there. She said, "What in the name of Job?" I said, "Mama, we got to help her. We got to help her." So Mama ran into the back room, and she came out with with her sewing tin, and she opened up that tin. I went into the food closet and I found my daddy's old mason jars of moonshine. Before he died, he used to drink a lot of moonshine. And we'd unscrew that lid. My mama said, "Pour some in the wound." And she was threading up that needle, and I poured that moonshine in the wound, and the dog, she squealed and she yelped. Oh, it hurt her. And my mama threaded that needle, and we sewed her up as fast as we could. Oh, that dog. She was a frightful mess. We put her on the back porch, and she laid there for 2 weeks. And I fed her all my leftovers, and sometimes I even fed her my dinner itself. And those were really hard times for us in those days. The little boy said, "What do you mean hard times?" He said, "Oh, Lord, the hard times? That's when American families didn't have nothing to eat. So you take it for granted. If you need new clothes or food, you just tell your mama and she brings you into town, or she goes to the refrigerator and she cooks you up something real nice. But back then, we didn't even have refrigerators. We had ice boxes, and we didn't even afford the ice." The old man said, "I fed her until she gained her strength back, and soon she was as good as new." Oh, she was a good dog. Good dog. The old man took a few more carvings off his piece of basswood. He said, "I remember one time I took that dog into the church. We used to have dinner on the grounds. Dinner on the grounds is when we used to all gather around on that big green lawn outside the First Baptist Church, and we'd stack the card tables up end to end, and we'd outfit them with bone china casserole ware, and every woman in the congregation would bring her absolute best dish. And this involved a lot of cheese and a lot of cholesterol. And you would walk along with a plate, and you'd dish yourself up, and you'd come back for seconds and thirds. It was the highlight of our church calendar. And I brought Shelby one night to show her off to some of my friends. We came walking up that church driveway. I saw them people, and saw the lights that they were hanging, the cocktail lights and the Chinese lanterns. And Shelby sniffed the air one time, and I saw this look come over her face. Shelby smelt all that casserole and all that beef and chicken and stewed meat, and she bolted straight away from me, and she ran like a red streak across that church lawn, and people parted away because they didn't want to get knocked down. And in a couple seconds, I saw her leap onto that table, and it looked like she was surfing from one side to the other. I saw casserole dishes being flung apart, one, then another, and all that food was on the ground, and I heard the sound of cracking glass. It was a disaster. Had to get me a job at the church that summer. To pay for all that damage, I was the custodian. So I repaired the leaky roof, and I fixed the church steps and painted the clapboards, and I touched up the pews with wood stain and polished the pulpit. Oh, that dog, she was trouble. There was another time I was going into town, never forget it, and there was this girl that I had really been, every time I saw her, I made a point to talk to her and make sure that I said a few things that would impress her. So I walked right up to her, and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And we got to talking. We started to smile and laugh and giggle. And Shelby, well, you know, she was a really, really jealous dog. She didn't like any female of any species to get my attention. And so Shelby, she got right between us and tried to wedge us apart. And I said, "Shelby, you quit doing that now. Quit doing that." And Shelby got in between us again and tried to wedge us apart. Eventually, Shelby got so disgusted with this fine-looking female that she jumped on her and knocked her down. This poor young woman rolled into the dirt, and her new dress was all muddy and covered in paw prints. And I said, "Shelby," and it was too late. Her dress was all messed up. I had to get another job just to pay for that young woman's dress. But you know, there's something about Shelby, something nobody could believe. During the hard times when food was real scarce, and it got real scarce, and sometimes when you thought it wouldn't get any worse, the hard times, they got even worse. There were bread lines in our town to the Methodist church, people just trying to get a hunk of bread to feed their family. People were stealing chickens just to keep their kids from starving. There were dust storms in the middle of the United States eating up farms, and so bread was real expensive. Hardly anybody could afford it, and there were people out of work all over the country. We had nothing. And yet my mama would look out over that window over her sink, and she saw Shelby coming across the east field. And in Shelby's mouth would be a rabbit or a squirrel or a coon or sometimes a chicken from someone's yard. God forbid we didn't want to know where it came from. Shelby did this a lot, and she dropped that animal right there on the porch right in front of our door. That dog fed us. The little boy looked at his granddaddy. He said, "Are you for real?" Granddaddy held up his right hand. He said, "Look, you ever known me to lie about anything but fishing and taxes?" The little kid shook his head. He said, "No." A few years later, along come the big war. And I got caught up just like everybody else. I hope you never have to go through war. Well, I had to report for duty to go to basic training at Amarillo Airfield. I remember Mama, and my brother, my sister, and Shelby came to the bus station to say goodbye to me. Whew. Do you know that when I got onto that bus and found my seat, Shelby ran onto the bus and jumped onto the seat beside me. Her tail was wagging and swatting that seat like a bass drum. And all the men on the bus started to laugh, and they started to cackle, and they started to cheer. And I looked at Shelby. I said, "Shelby, you got to go. Go ahead on now. Go ahead on." Shelby looked at me. For the first time in my life, she listened to me. Did exactly as I said. Walked off that bus. Sat down there on the curb with my mama and my brother and my sister. And you know, in some ways, it looked like that dog was crying when I drove away. The little kid said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, I went to war. Boy, we were young men, we were boys over there in France, and we were scared. You won't ever know how scared we were. Every night was like a bad dream. And then I got shot." And the kid said, "Where'd you get shot, Granddaddy?" Granddaddy said, "Right here." And he lifted his arm and he showed it. And the boy said, "Did it hurt?" He said, "Use your imagination." The little boy said, "Did you cry?" Granddaddy said, "Well, sure as hellfire didn't laugh, if that's what you mean." The little boy listened to the ball game for a little while. The score was now 39-0. He looked at his granddaddy with heavy eyes. He said, "Well, what happened to Shelby?" Granddaddy inspected the carving, and his face got awful warm again, and he said, "Well, when I got home from being in R&R over in Italy after getting shot, I come walking up our driveway after I'd hitched a ride in town with Dan McGee. And I jumped off the back of that truck, and I was walking up the driveway, and I saw that dog before I saw anything else. She came loping down that gravel road looking at me. Her ears looked like wings. They were spread out beside her. And she got to me, and I squatted down, and I dropped my bag, and I held her, and we rolled around in the dirt for a little while. Oh, I don't ever remember being that happy. And then out come my mom and out come my brother and sister, and they jumped me, and we were all rolling out there in the dirt. And it was the first time in my life that I realized how good it feels to come home. Then the old man's chin began to quiver, and that grizzled veteran with the gunshot wound beneath his arm, with a soft spot for all creatures with collars, took another few swipes at his basswood block. The wood shavings fell into his lap and scattered around his feet. And he said that same year Shelby died. Shelby was getting awful old, and she had white around her snout, and she had a really, really bad hip, and she just didn't sleep through the night all the time. You could hear her kind of hassling in the middle of the night. She died that year from old age. She went peacefully. I ain't got no complaints there, but I tell you, I've thought about it for a long time since then. And I thought to myself, that dog waited for me to get home from war before she went on to her final destination. She waited. I buried her in the East Field where I first found her. I went over to that fence post where she used to be, and I dug a hole, and I cried the whole way. And I put her little body in it. I covered her with dirt, and I said the 23rd Psalm, and I said the Lord's Prayer. You see, boy, once in every man's life, he's lucky enough to find love, a true love that surpasses life itself and makes him think of things bigger than himself. and makes him feel something way down in the pit of his soul. If he's real lucky, he'll find that love more than once. He'll find it twice. But once is enough. Don't ever take that love for granted. Once you lay hold to it, son. But by then, Granddaddy looked to his left where that little boy was leaned against his shoulder. And he heard a light, gentle snoring sound coming from that little boy's mouth. And even though it didn't look like that little boy was listening, there beneath the billions of stars above him, he was listening. And in fact, that little boy was doing more than listening. He was taking it all in to his long-term memory, so that one day, when that little boy stood on a stage a lot like this, with a microphone in front of his face, a lot like the one I'm holding, he would remember the details enough so that he could share with this fine theater audience a story which makes this boy, who is an adult now, realize that even after all these years, all he's doing right here is imitating his granddaddy. Hey, thank you very much for having me. It's been a wonderful pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Sean of the South. I've been your host tonight, Sean Dietrich, and man, it's been a bona fide privilege coming to you via these podcast airwaves. This episode was brought to you by Case Knives, a tradition of my family, dating back to my granddaddy, who once said the best cure for idle hands was to build something. So keep your hands sharp with a case knife. And by Folklore Brewing and Meadery, quite literally the best brew in Alabama. Visit folklorebrewingandmeadery.com. That music you heard behind me tonight was the Purple Holes. Katie Lou and Penny Lee Clark of the Purple Holes were raised on a working farm in the deep piney woods of East Texas, but that didn't stop these two Texan girls from finding their way to the hills of Tennessee, specifically Music City, where they began touring with various country artists and writing songs for Nashville's largest publishing company, Sony Tree. The Purple Holes are no stranger to the good life of music. Look them up. You will not regret it. thepurpleholes.com, and download their music today. These girls are the real deal. Also, they're identical twins, so can't beat that. To find anything more about what I do, you can visit SeanOfTheSouthShow.com, and there you can find archived episodes dating back to this episode, which you just heard, although I don't know why, because you must have terrible taste in podcasts. And while you're there, I hope you take the time to drop me a line. Tell me about your birthday announcements, wedding invitations, and potluck socials, and I do my best to read that stuff over the air for my friends, because I love to do that sort of stuff for my friends. And friends, remember, wherever you go, there you are, and wherever you are, there you've gone. Adios.